Yeah, in this week's video, we're going to be putting this picture on a pot. I just fell in love with this picture and it needed to go on something. We're also using SculptCrete, and I used about 23 pounds on this project. Now we're using saran wrap as a barrier here on a mold that I had access to. Now, obviously, you won't have access to this mold, but large bowls and things of that nature can be used as molds. And in a future video, we'll be going over how to make your own mold. Now we're mixing up the SculptCrete using a paint mixture, and I'm mixing up about 5 pounds at a time. And this is a little bit dry, but it'll work. So we're gonna put some out on some plastic, and we'll use a sprayer to add more moisture as we need it. And we'll just go ahead and knead it like dough between that plastic. And having a bucket around with water to clean your roller and to keep your hands clean from the SculptCrete is a good idea. It's also a good idea to have gloves as you're working with SculptCrete, especially if you're sensitive to concrete materials, as the lye and other chemicals in concrete can be somewhat harsh on your hands. Okay, so I'm kneading about 1 to 2 pounds here at a time and then rolling it out, and I'm going to about 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch on the thickness, as I want that to be the general thickness around the whole pot. And we'll continue to make 1 to 2 pound layers as we go around the pot, filling up those gaps. And a putty knife works really well here to smooth out that layer and to get rid of the seams in between those layers. So yeah, this works really well, and this is super fun, guys. If you haven't used SculptCrete yet, you should definitely try it and make something. I think you'll really enjoy it. Now I'm continuing around the pot, and we're just filling up those gaps. And where it overlays here, you can just cut off that excess and lay it into an empty spot. And then, yeah, just keep smoothing it out with your putty knife. And this is such a nice way to hand build a pot, as you don't need a kiln. You just it dries in four hours approximately. I let my projects, especially when they're this large, sit overnight so that they're completely hard before we demold. You'll notice here how smooth you can just get the surface of this pot with just a putty knife and just working the surface. This works really well. Now here, the next day, the SculptCrete's completely hard, and I'm just using a chisel to loosen it. And then of course that saran wrap is a barrier coat, so it just comes off really easy. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to add some reinforcement to the inside of the pot so we don't have any cracking as it cures out all of the way. And I'm using some fiber tape, the tape that you would use for sheetrock actually. And this stuff is really awesome for SculptCrete. Now I don't put any fibers in the SculptCrete. I don't like the texture that it gives, so I leave them out. You could add them, or just do this kind of thing where you're adding reinforcement in the areas that you want. Now I've mixed up some SculptCrete to a consistency of about peanut butter at this point, and I'm just adding it on the inside of that pot over the that fiber tape or that mesh tape for the sheetrock. It works really well. Once you've covered all of that fiber tape in the SculptCrete, I just come back over with a wet brush, and brush it with the water to smooth it out. Obviously, it's not a huge deal as it's going to be on the inside and not seen, but my perfectionism gets to me and I have to do it. Spraying down the bottom side now of the next side of the mold, and again we're just going to layer it with the saran wrap. I noticed with the water it helps get that saran wrap just stick really well. Just a little trick that helps. And again, obviously you don't have access to this mold, but you can use a large mold, or if you notice, the bottom side of this mold actually is about the size of some of your exercise balls. So you could use an exercise ball for a mold, which I've done in the past, and it works really well. So this is the next day on this mold as well, and I'm pulling it off here using that chisel. And this one stuck just a little bit more. I think it just had some suction going on, but once I broke that initial amount, then it just comes off really easy. Okay, so on this side of the mold, I let the bottom sit too long without adding that reinforced fiber tape on the bottom side like I did on the top side, and it got a crack. And this isn't the end of the world. You can take a Dremel with a diamond bit and just kind of hollow it out a little bit, and then I use an Insecure super glue with a quick set spray, and any super glue and quick set spray works really well on SculptCrete. Just putting that on the inside, and I'm not going to patch the outside for now, as we're going to be patching that anyway when we do the two seams. So using Gorilla Glue, we're going to glue the two pieces together. Now you can use SculptCrete as a glue, but it takes longer to set than the Gorilla Glue, and I think Gorilla Glue probably is slightly stronger anyway. And Gorilla Glue loves moisture, being around moisture. It helps set the glue. So where this is a day old or a couple days old, there's still moisture in these pots, and it helps just superset that glue. In 4 to 6 hours later, the glue is completely dry, and we can take this outside. And I'm just using an angle grinder with a 36 grit flap disc on there, and I'm just sanding it and smoothing out where those two seams come together. Obviously, some of the thicknesses were slightly different as you hand built this pot. So you'll notice that I'm wearing some PPE, my safety glasses, and a good mask. You want something N95 or better for this type of work, as this is really dusty and we don't want those dust particles in your lungs. And anytime you're working with SculptCrete, whether you're mixing it, grinding on it, or sanding on it, you should be wearing a mask, because this is just a general good idea. Okay, now we're moving on, and I've mixed up some SculptCrete in a yogurt consistency, and we're just going to go ahead and we're going to blend in this seam now and wet the surface. Anytime you're adding a new layer of SculptCrete to an old layer, especially if it's been sitting for a while, it's a good idea to spray down the surface and wet the surface, as this will help the new SculptCrete adhere to the old layer. Now I'm adding in the fiber tape again, or the mesh tape that you use on sheetrock, and this is just for some reinforcement, as I want that seam to be extremely strong. And I'm just adding a few layers, going around it and smoothing it up as I go, and just making it as smooth as I can possibly get it. Then I go over it with a wet brush, and I'm just smoothing it up as much as I can with this. And it still leaves ridges, and I'm going to use a blade or a knife that they actually make cakes with, and smooth out the frosting. And these work really good. This is actually one of my favorite tools, and it's kind of fun. All the tools that you'll collect to make your sculptures and pottery with as you're working with the SculptCrete. But yeah, this is a really good tool if you need. So now this is the next day, and I'm going over the pot with a sander, and I think I've got like 150 grit on this orbital sander, and this just takes out some of those really rough surfaces that were left by the putty knife and the brush. Now that we've got it sanded smooth, I'm going to come back over it with some all-purpose joint compound, and this will give us a really smooth finish. And you just brush on a couple coats and then let it dry. And then once it's dry, we can come back over with a sanding sponge, and this is also used for sheetrock. I don't remember what grit it is, but it's a fine grit, and you just come back and sand all of this smooth, and we get a perfect transition. There's no indication of a seam at all on this. Alright, now it's time to start painting. I'm using this Rust-Oleum Ultra Cover. It's I believe an acrylic based paint. Just rolling it on, and my roller right here is actually a little wet from a previous project, so I'm just getting that moisture out of it, and then it'll start covering better. So anyway, we're just going to cover the whole pot in black as our base coat, and then we can paint on top of that. Also, I did add a primer coat before this, a seal coat, before I put this black on. I used it. I didn't show it in the video because I was testing it out and seeing if I liked it. I'll probably use it in future videos. But gesso would work just fine as a primer as well. And a primer coat in general is a good idea before you start painting. Okay, now that we have our pot all black, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start doing our detailed painting. And I used a projector and projected it on a piece of paper and then cut out those pieces so I could lay it out on the pot in a way that actually looked good and worked. And I had to adjust it quite a bit in order to get it to work on my pot. But yeah, here you see I'm starting to fill in those different areas on the pot, and then I just do an outline and then paint that outline. So this worked really well. Took a lot of time. I guess there's about 3 to 4 coats per section, so that you got a nice solid color. And you see the red there. I had slightly different color in between the two areas, as I had mixed up two different batches and didn't get them exactly the same. So keeping a good idea of how much you put in colors to get the color that helps. So hopefully you have an easier time than I did on matching the color. But yeah, this is starting to turn out really cool, and I'm starting to learn some new techniques of painting. I'm not by any means a professional artist, but man, do I really enjoy the process of making these type of art projects or pottery or whatever you would want to call it. And I think it turned out really cool. So I really enjoyed the process and learned a lot of new techniques and increased my skill quite a bit. So the red on the eye was the last little bit that I had to do, and just filling it in here. And also I did put a clear coat, a seal coat on this, and I've been playing with some different seal coats, and it turned out really nice. I'll be showing that in some future videos of what I used. But here's the end product, and I think it turned out just fantastic. I'm in love with it. Hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. So hopefully we'll see you in the next video. Thanks, guys.